The cold wind howled through the deserted alley, biting at the skin like icy needles. It was the kind of night that made even the most hardened souls pause and seek shelter. The streetlights flickered weakly, casting long, eerie shadows on the snow-covered ground. Everything around seemed still, as if the world itself was holding its breath. But in the far corner of the alley, there was movement. Tom Cruise, dressed in a simple jacket and jeans, his breath visible in the frigid air, crouched low to the ground. He'd been walking home from a late-night meeting when something caught his eye. A small figure, huddled and trembling beneath a pile of old newspapers, barely visible under the layer of snow that had begun to fall in thick, soft flakes. At first, he thought it was just a stray bag or trash caught in the wind, but then a soft whimper reached his ears. His heart skipped a beat. Slowly he moved closer, his boots crunching on the snow. The figure didn't stir. He reached out with a cautious hand, pushing aside the snow and old papers. Beneath them, he found a dog, a small, shivering dog, with matted fur and wide, terrified eyes. Tom's heart sank. He had never been one to shy away from animals in need, but something about the condition of this little dog struck him deeply. The poor creature was cold to the touch, its body so frail that it seemed barely able to breathe. Without hesitation, Tom scooped the dog up into his arms, cradling it against his chest as he began to move toward his apartment. He could feel its little body shudder with each breath, its soft whimpers echoing in the still night. As he walked, his mind raced. How could someone let a poor animal suffer like this? Who could possibly be so heartless? He hurried back to his apartment, the dog nestled tightly against his chest. The warmth of his home greeted him like an old friend as he kicked the door open and stepped inside. The dog's shivering had slowed, but it was still far from safe. Tom set the dog gently on a soft blanket, grabbing a towel to dry it off. He made quick work of it, wiping away the dirt, snow, and grime that clung to its fur. But as he worked, he noticed something strange. Beneath the dirt and matted fur, there were patches of red, and something that looked like a scar. Frowning, Tom took a closer look. There was no mistaking it. This wasn't just a stray dog. Whoever had left it out here had done something to it. The scars were too deliberate, too severe. He paused, his heart beating faster. Who could have hurt this dog? And why was it abandoned in this state, left to freeze in the middle of a harsh winter night? Tom couldn't shake the feeling that there was something much bigger going on. Something that had brought this innocent animal to the edge of life and death. He gently stroked the dog's head, his mind still reeling from what he'd found. And that's when he felt it. A small lump under the dog's fur, right near its neck. Tom's fingers froze for a moment. His instincts told him that something wasn't right, something more than just the injuries, more than just the cold. He knew deep down that whatever was hidden beneath the surface of this dog's suffering was about to change everything. And it would change him. Tom's fingers hovered over the small lump beneath the dog's fur. And for a brief moment, he considered turning away. It wasn't a comfortable thought, the idea of digging deeper into this poor creature's past. But there was something about the dog's haunted, tired eyes that wouldn't let him look away. He gently ran his fingers over the lump again, feeling the subtle shape of something solid underneath. Whatever it wasn't part of the dog's body. Tom hesitated. What could be hidden there? A microchip? A tracker? Or something far more sinister? He glanced at the dog, who was now curled up on the blanket, exhausted but still aware enough to nudge his hand with its cold nose. It had calmed somewhat since they'd arrived in the warmth of the apartment, but Tom could still feel the fragility of its small frame. "I'm not going to hurt you," he whispered softly. "Let's see what's going on." With careful hands, Tom parted the dog's fur further, his heart pounding with the uncertainty of what he might uncover. The lump seemed to be pressing against the skin, hard and foreign, and with one swift motion, he gently pulled at the fur surrounding it. What he saw next made his blood run cold. A small, weathered metal tag lay embedded in the dog's neck, as if it had been grafted into its skin. There was no sign of a collar or leash, just this strange piece of metal, almost like a badge, designed to remain hidden beneath layers of fur and injury. Tom's breath caught in his throat. This was no ordinary stray. Whoever had placed this tag on the dog hadn't just abandoned it, they had marked it. The thought sent a chill down his spine. Why would someone do this? And how had it ended up on the streets, left to die? He felt a surge of anger rise in his chest. This dog didn't deserve to be treated like this. No living creature did. And as the weight of the situation settled in, Tom's thoughts shifted. There had to be more to this story than just a stray animal. Whoever had done this was still out there. His mind raced, piecing together fragments of information. A dog like this didn't just show up on the streets without a reason. There was no way it was a random occurrence. Someone had gone to great lengths to make sure this dog was lost, hidden, and forgotten. Tom stood up, pacing around the small apartment, his mind spinning. The more he thought about it, the more questions flooded his brain. How had the dog been injured? Why was it left to freeze in the alley? And what exactly did this strange metal tag mean? He glanced at the dog once more, still curled up on the blanket, its eyes watching him with a quiet understanding. He knew this wasn't just about saving a helpless animal anymore. It was about uncovering a hidden truth, about finding out who was behind this cruelty, and why they'd chosen this poor animal as their victim. Tom's gaze hardened with determination. He couldn't just let this go. He needed to know what was going on, to expose the dark forces at play. He leaned down, gently lifting the dog again, cradling it carefully in his arms. Whatever was going on, he wasn't about to walk away now. This wasn't just a rescue. This was the beginning of something much bigger. A journey into a world Tom had never imagined, where kindness collided with something darker, and where everything he thought he knew about justice would be tested. And for the first time in a long while, Tom felt something deeper stir inside him. It wasn't just anger or confusion, it was something stronger. A sense of purpose. One that made him realize this wasn't just a story about a freezing dog. This was his story now, and he was going to find out the truth. As Tom sat on the couch, the dog resting quietly on his lap, the conflict that lay ahead loomed larger than ever. What had he just uncovered? And what dangers might lie ahead, as he tried to piece together the mystery of the dog's past? The journey was just beginning, and Tom had no idea how far it would take him. But one thing was certain, he couldn't back down now. The days following Tom's discovery of the metal tag were a whirlwind of questions and unease. He had already taken the dog to the vet, hoping to find some answers, to uncover more about the strange markings and the bizarre metal tag. But each answer led to more questions, and Tom felt as if he was digging deeper into a hole he wasn't sure he wanted to explore. The dog, whom he had named Chance, had no microchip, no obvious identification, and no records with any local shelters. The vet was just as perplexed as Tom. The dog had clearly been through a lot, with the scarred patches on its body showing signs of previous injuries. But there was nothing in Chance's medical history that would explain the strange situation. By all accounts, the dog should have been untraceable, just another stray, abandoned and forgotten by the world. But Tom couldn't shake the feeling that the dog was part of something much bigger than a random act of cruelty. And the more he thought about it, the more certain he became that he couldn't let it go. This was his responsibility now. Still, there was something in the air that felt off, and it wasn't just about Chance. Ever since the vet visit, Tom had begun to notice subtle changes in his own life. It started small, just a vague sense of being watched, a flicker of movement out of the corner of his eye, a car passing by just a bit too slowly, a figure standing outside his window for just a little too long. He dismissed it at first, chalking it up to paranoia or the weight of the situation, but the feeling only grew stronger. One evening, as Tom was returning to his apartment, he noticed something strange. His door had been left ajar. His heart immediately began to race. He approached cautiously, peering into the apartment. Nothing seemed out of place, but the sense of unease that gnawed at him remained. He stepped inside, carefully locking the door behind him and checking every room, every corner. It wasn't until he checked the small table by the door that he noticed it. A single envelope, white and unmarked, sat in the center. No return address. Tom's instincts screamed at him to leave it alone, to ignore it, but curiosity pulled him in. He picked it up, his fingers trembling as he slid it open. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper. "We know what you're doing. Stay out of this." The message was simple, direct, and chilling. His mind raced as he read it over and over again. "We know what you're doing." What did that mean? How could anyone know about the dog? Tom hadn't told anyone except a few close friends, and none of them would have done anything to put him in danger. The envelope didn't even have a return address, just this cryptic warning. He felt a cold chill run down his spine. Whoever had written this knew exactly what he was up to. For a moment, Tom considered dropping everything, abandoning the search, and walking away from whatever dangerous situation he had stumbled into. But he knew deep down that he couldn't. Not after everything he had seen. Not after the way Chance had looked at him with those wide, desperate eyes. As if the dog knew it had a small sliver of hope left. Hope that Tom would be the one to uncover the truth. He shoved the note in his pocket and turned to look at Chance, who was curled up on the couch, blissfully unaware of the dark forces beginning to circle around them. "We can't stop now," Tom muttered to the dog, more to himself than anything. "We're in this together." The next few days were a blur of paranoia and confusion. Tom couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him, following his every move. He changed his routine, taking different routes home, avoiding any place he might have been followed. But the more he tried to escape the invisible presence, the more it seemed to close in on him. His once peaceful neighborhood now felt suffocating, as if every shadow held something sinister, something lurking just beyond his view. That afternoon, Tom went to the library, hoping to find something, anything, that could shed light on the mysterious tag and the potential owners behind it. As he pored through pages of old records, one thing began to surface, an unusual pattern. There were rumors, whispers of a secretive group operating in the area, but the sources were unreliable, and the information was fragmented. A group that dealt in things better left undiscovered, dark and covert. Suddenly Tom's phone buzzed. It was a text from his friend Jake, someone he trusted completely. The message was short but cryptic. "You need to leave now. They know." Tom's stomach dropped. They knew. Who was they? Jake hadn't even been told about the note, and yet, he knew something was wrong. Before Tom could reply, the phone buzzed again. This time, it was a picture. A blurry image of someone standing outside his apartment. The figure was barely visible, just a shadow in the darkness, but it was enough. It was happening. Whatever game he had unknowingly stepped into had escalated beyond his control. His mind spun, and panic set in. He needed to act fast. Tom grabbed his things, his heart pounding in his chest. He wasn't sure who they were or what kind of danger he was in, but one thing was clear. He couldn't hide anymore. The mystery surrounding Chance was bigger than he had imagined, and the threat was much closer than he ever anticipated. Tom's world was unraveling, layer by layer, faster than he could process. He had no idea who was behind this or what the stakes truly were, but he was in too deep now. The search for answers was no longer just about rescuing a dog. It was about uncovering a conspiracy that threatened everything he knew. And he wasn't about to stop until he found the truth. But who could he trust? And how long would it be before the people who were following him caught up? Tom's head was spinning as he stared at the blurry image on his phone. Whoever had been watching him, they knew more than he could have ever anticipated. The weight of it settled in, making him feel like a pawn in a game much larger than himself. What was the point of this? And why had they singled him out? He rushed back to his apartment, every step heavy with the urgency of the situation. He couldn't just sit idly by and wait for whatever was coming next. No, he had to act, and he had to act fast. His mind raced with possibilities. Who could be behind this? Who could have the resources to monitor him so closely? The cryptic warning, the dog with the metal tag, the strange feeling that had never left him. It was all connected somehow. As soon as he entered his apartment, Tom locked the door and turned off his phone, the silent buzzing of incoming messages now grating against his nerves. He couldn't afford distractions. If someone was watching, they might be tracking his every move. The note, the shadowy figure outside, and now Jake's warning. It was all pointing to something much darker. He paced back and forth, trying to piece everything together. His thoughts went back to the group he had read about at the library, the rumors surrounding them, but no real details. The group's activities were shrouded in secrecy. Every mention he found was vague, whispers in the dark corners of the city, places where even the bravest men and women dared not go. And yet, here he was entangled in something he barely understood. Chance, the dog who had started this mess, lay on the couch, oblivious to the storm brewing around them. Tom couldn't afford to be distracted by the dog's presence, but a strange sense of protectiveness overwhelmed him. It wasn't just about rescuing the dog anymore. It was about something much larger, something he couldn't turn away from. If Chance was involved in whatever this was, then he was as much a target as Tom was. Just then, the sound of a car pulling up outside interrupted his thoughts. His heart skipped a beat. Was it them? Could they have tracked him here? He looked through the peephole. It was hard to make out the figure in the shadow of the car, but it didn't seem like the same person from the photo. Maybe it was just someone from the neighborhood. Or maybe it was something worse. He grabbed his coat, ready to leave and seek out answers, when a soft knock echoed from the door. Tom froze. "Tom!" A familiar voice called from the other side. It was Jake. He hadn't heard from him in hours. Reluctantly, Tom opened the door. Jake stood there, his face pale and eyes wide with urgency. "I've been trying to reach you," Jake said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "They're not messing around. You've got to get out of here." Tom slammed the door behind him, locking it once again. "What's going on? Who are they? And why the hell didn't you tell me anything sooner?" Jake's gaze flicked toward the couch, where Chance lay, still curled up under the blanket. "Is that the dog?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Tom nodded, his eyes narrowing. "Yeah, that's Chance. But who are these people, Jake? What's happening?" Jake took a deep breath. "I didn't want to get you involved. I should have told you sooner, but I was hoping it wouldn't get this far." Tom's confusion deepened. "Involved in what?" Jake lowered his voice, glancing over his shoulder nervously. "There's a group, a powerful one. They don't care about anything except control. They manipulate everything, from businesses to government contracts, to even smaller things like animal research. They use dogs, animals in general, for their own experiments. But it's not just that. They make sure nothing gets in their way. And if you're not on their side, you're their enemy." Tom felt his pulse quicken. "And this dog?" He gestured toward Chance. "How does it fit in?" Jake hesitated. "I don't know exactly, but they've been tracking it. I heard about a dog with similar markings. Something about this animal. It's important to them. Whatever happened to it, it's part of something bigger. They'll stop at nothing to get it back." Tom stared at Jake in disbelief. "So you knew about all of this? And you didn't say anything? Are you involved with them?" Jake's eyes darted nervously. "I didn't know how far this would go. I've been keeping my distance, trying to figure out how to get out. But now it's too late. They know about you now. It's not just the dog they're after. It's you too. You're caught up in this, whether you like it or not." Tom took a step back, his mind racing. His entire reality felt like it was flipping upside down. This was no longer just a rescue mission. It was something far more dangerous. And Jake was caught in the middle of it too. Suddenly, there was a loud bang on the door, shaking the apartment with its force. The sound echoed in the silence, and Tom's heart skipped a beat. The group was here. They had found him. Jake's eyes widened. "We have to go. Now." Without wasting another second, they darted toward the back door of the apartment. But as they reached the door, Tom's phone buzzed again, this time with a chilling message from an unknown number. "You can run, but you can't hide. The clock is ticking, Tom." Jake grabbed Tom's arm, pulling him toward the alleyway behind the building. "Come on, we don't have time." The adrenaline was pumping now, but Tom's mind was still spinning. There were too many pieces to this puzzle, too many unanswered questions. Who was this group? Why did they want Chance? Why did they want him? And most importantly, what would happen to them if they didn't escape? They turned the corner into the alley, but as Tom glanced over his shoulder, a black SUV rounded the street and stopped at the mouth of the alley. A figure emerged from the car, silhouetted in the dim light of the street lamp. Tom's heart sank. They were already here. The chase was on. The alleyway was a maze of shadows and uncertainty, but Tom's mind was laser-focused. His pulse thudded in his ears as he and Jake rushed down the narrow passage. The sounds of footsteps behind them echoed, and every instinct in Tom screamed to keep running. But the looming figure in the black SUV, now standing tall in the flickering streetlight, made it clear. They were surrounded. They reached a dead end at the end of the alley, a tall brick wall that seemed to block their only escape. Tom spun around, his breath ragged. Jake was just as winded, but fear was painted across his face, his eyes darting to the figure advancing toward them. Tom, what the hell are we gonna do? Jake's voice was barely a whisper, his voice strained. The man from the SUV took a slow step forward, his face still shrouded in darkness. You should have stayed out of this, Tom. His voice was low, controlled but menacing. Now you've dragged someone else into this mess. He glanced briefly at Jake, then back at Tom. That was your mistake. Tom stood tall, his heart racing but his mind clear. He had no intention of going down without a fight. But he also knew that running wasn't an option anymore. The walls were closing in too quickly. This was the moment, the climax of everything he'd been fighting for. There was no turning back. Who are you? Tom demanded, trying to keep his voice steady. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into the inside of his jacket, and Tom's gut twisted. Was he armed? Would they really kill them both? Jake seemed to sense Tom's growing panic. Tom, we need to go. Now, he hissed, but Tom's feet were rooted to the spot. I'm not running, Tom shot back, his eyes never leaving the stranger. He wasn't about to show weakness, not now, not when everything had come down to this single moment. The man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Running won't help you. You're too deep now. We've been watching you. Tom swallowed hard. Watching me? How much had they known? Had they been following him this entire time? Every move he made, every step, every second of this nightmare. Was it all under their control? Suddenly, a voice crackled from the speaker on the man's wrist, cutting through the tension like a knife. Boss, the dog's been located. Tom's heart skipped a beat. Chance. Get the dog now, the man ordered. His eyes flicked to the corner where Chance had been curled up in the apartment earlier, then back at Tom. We can't afford to let this slip. The chill that swept over Tom was like a bucket of ice water. The dog wasn't just a victim in this situation. Chance was the key. Tom's fight wasn't just for his own survival anymore. It was about protecting the dog, who had been dragged into a nightmare neither of them could have imagined. A rush of anger surged through Tom's veins. You won't touch him, he spat. The man didn't respond to the threat. Instead, he stepped closer, the sound of his boots clicking against the concrete floor reverberating in Tom's chest. You've got one chance to walk away. Tell us everything you know, and we'll make it painless for you. You don't want to see what happens if you refuse. Tom's fists clenched at his sides. His mind raced through all the information he had, all the pieces that didn't fit together. Chance's mysterious tag, Jake's warnings, the fact that they had been tracking his every move. It was too much to process, but one thing stood out. This wasn't just about Chance or about him. This was about something much larger, something they couldn't allow to succeed. The man was getting closer now, a mere few feet away. The tension between them was electric, like a string pulled tight, and ready to snap. You're going to regret this, the man warned, his voice turning low and cold, like the wind before a storm. Give us the dog and you can walk away. No one will need to get hurt. Tom's eyes flicked over to Jake, who was breathing heavily, his face pale but determined. Jake's gaze was focused on the ground, but Tom could feel his friend's fear radiating. They had no time to waste. Every second felt like a ticking clock. You don't get it, Tom said, his voice sharp, a hint of defiance cutting through the panic. You've been underestimating us from the start. The man raised an eyebrow. Oh. Tom took a step forward, his chest puffing out in a silent challenge. He wasn't going down like this, not when the stakes were this high. The man wasn't going to get the satisfaction of seeing him break. I don't know who you are or why you think you can control this situation, but I won't let you hurt that dog. Tom's eyes narrowed, and for the first time in days, he felt a spark of clarity. He had to protect Chance. He couldn't back down now. The man studied him for a moment, then shook his head slowly. You think you have control over this? Over us? You're already too late, Tom. He nodded to his accomplices who had emerged from the darkness, now surrounding them on all sides. You've made this personal. And now, we'll make you regret it. Tom's chest tightened. He was trapped. Every path of escape was blocked. But then, just as the man's hand reached into his coat once more, Tom heard it. A faint sound, coming from behind the brick wall. A soft whine. Chance. Without thinking, Tom lunged forward. He couldn't let them get their hands on the dog. Every muscle in his body screamed for action. He darted to the side, shoving past the man, but not before knocking him off balance. The man stumbled but quickly recovered. "Go!" Tom shouted at Jake, who hesitated for a second before running toward the far corner of the alley. Tom didn't have time to explain. He needed to act fast. He glanced over his shoulder. The figure in the black SUV was closing in, and Tom could hear the sound of footsteps quickly gaining on him. He needed to protect Chance, at all costs. With a burst of adrenaline, Tom dove for the back alley where the sound had come from. But as he turned the corner, he stopped cold. The dog was gone. Panic surged. Tom's heart dropped into his stomach. Where had Chance gone? Who had taken him? The man's voice came from behind him, cold and mocking. "You should have listened." And in that moment, Tom realized the truth. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. This was about saving Chance from whatever twisted fate awaited him, and stopping this group from carrying out whatever dark plans they had in store. The clock was ticking. The stakes had just been raised even higher. Tom's breath came in sharp gasps as he spun around, frantically searching the alley for any sign of Chance. His heart thudded violently in his chest, and for a moment, the world seemed to freeze. The realization hit him like a cold wave. Chance was gone. The man in the black suit, the one who had been watching from the shadows, stepped forward, his smirk widening. "You're too late, Tom. We've already got what we need. You should have walked away when you had the chance." Tom's fists clenched at his sides, his mind racing. What had they done to Chance? The anger was building up inside him, a fiery surge that threatened to explode. But he couldn't let it consume him, not now. Not when he was so close. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to focus. "Where is he?" Tom demanded, his voice low but dangerous. The man raised an eyebrow, clearly amused by Tom's frustration. "You think we're just going to hand him over to you? This isn't a game, Tom. You're in too deep." Tom stepped forward, his every muscle tense, his mind calculating the next move. He wasn't about to back down. Not now. Not when Chance's life was on the line. But he knew rushing in without a plan would only make things worse. The man noticed his determination and sneered. "You're not getting him back. There's nothing you can do. This is bigger than you." "I'm not leaving without him," Tom replied, his voice unwavering. The man's eyes flicked to the figures standing behind him, his accomplices, shadows in the night, blocking any possible exit. Tom realized there was no way out, no place to run, no help coming. The weight of the situation crashed down on him. He had to act now. Suddenly, there was a loud guttural bark, breaking the tense silence. Tom's head whipped toward the sound. A figure emerged from the darkness ahead. A silhouette he instantly recognized. Chance. The dog was back, running toward him with surprising speed, the glow of the streetlights reflecting off his fur. He was alive. And he was free. Tom's heart surged with relief. "Chance!" he shouted, extending his arms, and the dog ran straight to him, wagging his tail wildly, as if nothing had happened. For a moment, Tom just stood there, hand on Chance's head, overwhelmed by the wave of emotions crashing over him. He'd gotten him back. Against all odds, Chance was safe. But there was no time to savor the victory. The man took another step forward, his eyes narrowing. "You think this changes anything? You think you've won?" Tom stood up straight, his resolve solidifying. "This isn't just about the dog anymore. It's about stopping you." The man's smirk faltered, his confidence beginning to crack. "You're out of your depth, Tom." But the fear in the man's voice was unmistakable. Tom had just shifted the balance of power. With Chance back by his side, he wasn't just a target anymore. He had something to fight for. The figures around the alley shifted, the tension thick in the air. Every person in the alley could feel it, the shift, the tipping point. Tom wasn't just standing against the group anymore. He had a weapon. His will, his determination, and a bond with the dog that had already proven more powerful than anything else. "You're right," Tom said, his voice steady. "I'm out of my depth. But I'm not alone anymore. And that makes all the difference." He held Chance close, using the dog as a shield of hope and strength. This was the moment that everything would change. The man's empire of control and fear wasn't invincible. Tom wasn't going to let it take anything else from him. especially not Chance. The air was thick with silence as the two sides faced off. The stage was set for the final act. Tom had faced enough fear, enough manipulation. This time, he wasn't running. He wasn't backing down. The final showdown was about to begin. The silence in the alley was deafening as both sides stood still, locked in a tense standoff. Tom held Chance tightly, the dog's warm presence offering him both comfort and a surge of strength. The man in the black suit, along with his accomplices, were still watching him, their expressions unreadable, but the arrogance in their eyes had started to waver. They had underestimated him. They had underestimated Chance. The figures behind the man shifted, subtly closing in. They weren't giving up yet. But something had changed in the air. Tom wasn't the same man who had walked into this alley just hours ago, desperate and unsure. He had found his resolve, and with it he could feel the stakes rise higher. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about fighting for what was right, for the truth, and for the lives that were caught in this tangled web. "Do you really think this is going to end well for you?" the man in the suit said, his voice cold, though his earlier confidence had started to fade. "You think you've won? You have no idea what you're up against." Tom stood taller, his voice steady and unwavering. "I don't need to know everything. I just need to stop you from causing more harm." He tightened his grip on Chance, who seemed to sense the tension, his body still but alert. Tom could feel the dog's energy, their bond stronger than ever. This was about more than just the physical fight. It was about standing up for something that couldn't be broken. "You'll regret this," the man snarled, his face twisting with frustration. His hand slipped inside his jacket once more. But this time Tom wasn't afraid. His instincts had kicked in, and he was ready. The game had changed. Out of the corner of his eye, Tom saw Jake creeping toward the other side of the alley. His friend wasn't just standing there anymore. He was looking for a way to even the odds. The group had clearly underestimated Jake as well, and Tom could see the wheels turning in his friend's head. There was hope now. They weren't alone. The man in the suit took another step forward, his eyes narrowing. But just as he did, a sharp shout rang out from behind. The street was suddenly filled with the blinding lights of several police cars, their sirens wailing through the night. The reinforcements Tom had been waiting for had arrived. It was like the air had shifted again, this time for the better. The man froze, his expression betraying a flicker of panic. He looked behind him, his eyes widening as more officers emerged from the darkened street, guns drawn, ready for action. Tom felt a flood of relief wash over him. "You're surrounded," one of the officers called out. "Put your hands up. You're under arrest for kidnapping, illegal activity, and conspiracy." The man in the suit sneered, but there was no escape now. The alley that had once felt like a trap was suddenly a stage for justice. The figures who had been circling like vultures now found themselves boxed in. There was no way out. Tom's heart raced, but this time, it wasn't from fear. It was from a sense of victory, of relief. "This is it," he thought. "It's over." The man's hand twitched again. But before he could make a move, one of the officers was on him, his arm yanking the man's hands behind his back. "You're done," the officer said, his voice firm. As the police moved in to secure the rest of the group, Tom felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. His heart was still pounding in his chest, but the weight on his shoulders was starting to lift. The dog was safe. Jake was safe. And most importantly, they had stopped a dangerous group from causing more harm. Jake approached Tom, his face pale but relieved. "We did it," he said, his voice still shaky but full of gratitude. "We actually did it." Tom nodded, his voice quiet but filled with resolve. "Yeah, we did. But it's not over yet. We have to make sure this doesn't happen again." The man in the suit was being led away by officers, his eyes filled with fury, but Tom wasn't concerned with his anger anymore. He had been just one cog in a much larger machine. The real fight was making sure that machine didn't turn again. Jake turned to the officers, speaking to one of them who had approached him. "You have no idea how much trouble this group has caused. You need to check everything, all their connections. It's bigger than just what's happening here." The officer nodded. "We're on it. You've done the right thing, helping us stop this. We'll make sure everything comes to light." Tom didn't say anything but nodded, his mind still reeling from the weight of everything that had just happened. There had been too many close calls, too many moments where he wasn't sure if they'd make it out alive. But now, with the man in custody and the police taking control, the burden felt lighter. It wasn't over, but this was a significant win. A victory for them, for Chance. Chance sat at Tom's feet, looking up at him with those big soulful eyes. There was a calm now, a quiet understanding between them. The dog had been through the worst of it, and so had Tom. But they both made it out on the other side. Tom crouched down, gently stroking Chance's fur, a smile breaking through the exhaustion. "We did it, buddy. We made it." Jake stood beside him, watching the scene unfold as the police handled the remaining criminals. "You know, I never thought I'd see the day. You've got a way of pulling us through, man." Tom chuckled softly, still in disbelief at the turn of events. "I didn't do it alone." Jake laughed, and they both took a moment to appreciate the peace that was finally settling over the alley. But even as they stood there, reflecting on the madness of the past few hours, Tom knew deep down that this victory was just one step in a much larger journey. He had learned a lot from this experience. That no matter how dark or dangerous the situation, as long as you have something worth fighting for, something to protect, there's always hope. And no matter how small the glimmer, you have to hold on to it, no matter what. The world may be full of challenges, but the strength to face them comes from the courage to take a stand, and to never give up on those who need you most. As the final criminals were led away in handcuffs, Tom stood in the middle of the alley, his gaze fixed on Chance, who was sitting at his feet, tail wagging gently. The weight of the night's events was starting to sink in, and a sense of relief washed over him. What had begun as a harrowing journey, one filled with danger, doubt, and uncertainty, had come to a close, but not without cost. The police officers began taking statements, their voices low as they spoke to witnesses and secured the scene. Jake had gone off to talk to one of the detectives, filling them in on the details they needed to know. Tom remained standing, his eyes never leaving Chance, who seemed to sense the shift in his owner's mood. "You okay, Tom?" Jake asked, walking back toward him with a weary but relieved smile. "It's finally over." Tom nodded, but the exhaustion weighed heavily on him. "Yeah, it's over. But it feels like just the beginning." He sighed, feeling the last remnants of tension slowly melt away. "We've got a lot of work ahead of us. People need to know what happened here. The truth, it's still out there." Jake's expression softened. "I know, but look at what we've done tonight. We've stopped something huge. You didn't just rescue Chance. You rescued a whole lot of people from the shadows. And you did it without compromising who you are." Tom gave him a small smile, appreciating the sentiment, but still feeling the weight of the responsibility that still lay ahead. "I couldn't have done it alone, though. You were there every step of the way." Jake shook his head, stepping closer. "You led us. We all followed you because you never gave up. You fought for what's right, even when it seemed impossible. And look where we are now." Tom's eyes flicked down to Chance, who nudged his hand, as if urging him to move on. With a final glance at the alley, Tom took a deep breath. "I guess that's what matters, huh? Fighting for what's right, even when it feels like you're outmatched." Jake clapped him on the shoulder. "You're a lot stronger than you give yourself credit for." Tom nodded, a quiet sense of pride swelling in his chest. He had made it through something he never thought he'd survive. It wasn't just about fighting evil or confronting danger. It was about standing firm in the face of fear, about doing what was right no matter the odds. And in the end, that's what made all the difference. He looked back at Chance, who was still watching him, eyes full of trust and loyalty. "We make a good team, don't we, boy?" he whispered. The dog responded with a happy bark, tail wagging as if to confirm Tom's sentiment. As the night began to calm, and the police took control, Tom knew that the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. There would be more challenges, more obstacles to face. But with the lessons he'd learned, and the bond he shared with Chance, he felt ready for whatever came next. The world was full of darkness, but Tom had learned that even in the deepest shadows, there could be light. As long as you had the courage to fight for it. "Let's go home," Tom said softly, his hand resting on Chance's back as they walked into the night, knowing that no matter what lay ahead, they had each other. And that was enough. The end.